Hey everyone, it is a hot week, 100 degrees all week long. We're caught in that heat dome that is keeping me from working this week, so I'm doing a lot of things for my Bigfoot research down here in my workspace. It's nice and cool down here in the garage, so it's allowing me some time to get some of this stuff done. But I've also got some stories in my back pocket that I've been wanting to get them out on my YouTube channel, just because they're so interesting, and now's as good a time as any. I was telling the previous story before about being involved in a church that got me in contact with a lady who had an encounter up in Chalice, Idaho in 1970, and that's the previous video that I downloaded. But at the same time frame that I was online or on Facebook, 10, 12 years ago, I friended a lot of people who I went to church with when I was a boy, up until I was 16, 17. Well, anyways, one of those ladies reached out to me, an ex-friend from the church. We belonged to a church that had 3 different congregations within that one church. One was called the South Church, which was located in Olathe. The North Church, which we went to, that's the one we went to, which is in Riverside. And then there was an East Church because of its relative location to Kansas City, and East Church being in the Independence area. Well, anyways, I was contacted by a lady from California, and her name was Amber. She went to my church, the North Church, and she saw all my Bigfoot stuff, and she said, hey, she said, Randy, did you ever talk to the Scarboroughs and from the East Church? And I said, no, why? And she said, I remember sitting out there at their farm one night till 11 o'clock at night talking about the Bigfoots on their property. And I'm like, what? I'm in shock. So I reach out to a friend of mine who lives in Odessa, who went to that church also, and she got me in contact with the daughter, and we chit-chatted about it, and she's like, oh yeah, we had a few years of stuff going on out there. And I was kind of floored. I mean, here right under my nose was this Bigfoot stuff going on when I'm 14, 15, 16, and not knowing later in my life that I would have my own encounter that got me so ate up with this subject. So I get in contact with the lady. The gentleman of the home had passed away. They had a big farm family. There were 12 kids. They lived on 100 acres, and it was on Strode Road in Independence. So you can actually go look that up on the map. It is certainly built up now. There are subdivisions and stuff built up in there, but we're talking a long time ago, in the 80s is when this happened, and I talked to them probably around 2012, somewhere around there, so 10, 11 years ago. So needless to say, what the lady told me was just some really interesting stories, and this was over the phone. And she said, well, why don't I have all my kids? Do you want to talk to my kids? And I was like, well, sure. And so she set it up to where within a few weeks she had all of her kids coming back into town to the house that they still live in, or that she still lives in, on that 100 acres. And they all came back into town, and I was invited there to interview them, to talk about everything that had happened. And dude, I was excited. So I went there, and the lady was elderly, in her 70s, maybe even close to 80. And I hope I keep all the stories straight, but it was a long gravel road. I don't think Strode Road is gravel anymore, certainly, but back then it was a gravel road. She said barely got any traffic, maybe 1 or 2 cars a day. And here are some of the stories that happened around that time frame. It was like around 80, 81, 82, 1981 and 82 was the 2 years of heavy activity, and it started with finding footprints around their house. Well, I take that back. It may have started with a tetherball in their backyard that kept going missing. They had 12 kids that ranged from the age of 2 and 3 years old up to 19 years old. So they had children all through that range. And she said, so here's all the stories. They may not be in the correct order, but they had a tether ball that was constantly going missing off of their tether pole, and they would find it way down in the woods, down by the creek somewhere, all the time. Always find it down there, and no matter how many knots they would tie on it, it would occasionally go missing, and they'd have to go down in the woods and find it somewhere. So something was taking that tether ball, which is interesting. One winter, she found some tracks outside of her house in the snow that had come across a barbed wire fence, and they lived next to another 100 acres that belonged to Mrs. Scarborough's father. So basically there was like 200 acres there. Her father lived on one, and they lived on the other 100-acre patch of land. And so these footprints came down to their house and went around their whole house, and kind of stopped at each window. And and she said back then, they lived way down this dirt road, long driveway, never worried about locking their doors, and their living room window didn't even have curtains. It was just one of those type of homesteads where lots of activities, lots of kids, maybe no curtains on some of the windows. And so something could walk around, and you could see where it was standing by the windows and spend an exorbitant amount of time around the front windows where all the activities would be in the house, with the kids playing and the little kids. So that was kind of the beginning. She had her older son's friend come out there who was a tracker, or who could track, who went back in the woods and actually found 2 sets of tracks, and they were 2 different sizes. So they was, at the beginning, they were in the understanding that whatever was leaving these tracks, there was 2 of them, because there was 2 different size tracks, and of course they looked like human footprints. And another instance is, one time she said the 2 youngest ones came running around the house from the play area that they had in the back of the house, which was next to a wood line, and was screaming "Cookie Monster." And she laughed because she said that would be their only cognitive ability to describe what they saw, is what they could relate it to as looking like the Cookie Monster. So that in itself was interesting. And there was a middle son who's maybe 14 years old, who had to go to the kitchen one time when they were on their way to church. And so he had to run back in to do something, put something in the sink or wash something off of his hand. But when he was at the sink, the window was open, and in his peripheral vision, he saw the tether ball being manipulated. He looked out, and something was untying the tether ball, and it was covered in hair. And so he hollered at his mom and dad, and when he hollered at his mom and dad, who were at the vehicle in the front of the house, the window being open, he said that the creature looked up at him and took off running towards the woods. And he said he could see the hair wafting as it ran. The hair was about 6 inches hanging off the arms, and when it was pumping its arms, the hair would float and then jar, float and then jar as it was doing the running. And so he did describe the hair off the forearms that was lofting as it was running. And he actually drew a picture of what he saw, that they eventually took to their church minister to try to get answers to what were they seeing out on their property. And they were not real pleased with the response they got from their minister. I mean, he disregarded them, like maybe he didn't believe them, like they weren't telling the truth. And so they didn't get a lot of satisfaction out of having their minister know this. But anyways, didn't change the fact of all the things that were happening on their property. Here's another story from the property. one of the older daughters had a boyfriend that showed up on a date, and when he pulled up into the driveway, he was driving real erratic and got out and was kind of hemming and hawing, was white as a ghost, and ashen colored, like and they were trying to get it out of him what was going on, and he had to calm down and tell him that he had stopped about a quarter mile down the road and was throwing some beer cans out. He was drinking some beer cans to get his courage up for his date, I suppose. So I'm sure he didn't really want to admit that he was drinking, but he was tossing some beer cans out over this little bridge into the creek area, and something under the creek came up the bank and was peering through the railings at him, covered in hair, and he took off and made it to their house, and then the story unfolds that it was on that creek and under that bridge when it came out, when he stopped on it and was throwing off the beer can. So that's another instance of something happening there. Another instance was, they heard screams. Their grandfather, they had a couple of cattle kills, where the necks were broken. The smell of a stinky smell at times, and things like that. One time, let's see, what else? She said that she was making, they had a strawberry cabin. I'm not sure what a strawberry cabin is, but she said, they had a strawberry area and a little shed that they used for boxing up strawberries or whatever. She said one time she saw one behind that strawberry cabin looking over the top, and she said it was 8 foot tall. So whatever was behind it looking must have been taller than 8 foot. So that was her own sighting, which was the mother. And another instance that happened, she would make a lot of food for their family, having 12 kids and living on a farm. She would can a lot of food and make a lot of food. So every week she would make enough bread to get them through, a week or two. So she had probably made 16, 17 loaves of bread and had them sitting out on the counters at varying degrees of cooling off. And she said she had to run in to get some more ingredients, and they just had a swinging screen door right there under the carport. She'd go out, get in her car and go, which was a few miles down a dirt road until she'd get somewhere where there was a store. And when she came back, she immediately saw that there was a few loaves of bread gone. So something opened up the screen door and swiped 2 or 3 loaves of the bread. Not all of them, just enough you could hold in your hands and take off. So there was probably an instance where one opened up her door and reached in to grab something off the counter in her kitchen. Another story that I found interesting was one of the middle-aged boys had some friends over one time, and they were camping out and sleeping in sleeping bags. And about 2 a.m. One of the boys started hollering, and the other 2 boys scrambled up. All they had was tarps. They were sleeping in sleeping bags with tarps, in case it rained. And something snatched one of the sleeping bags and took off into the woods. One of the boys was screaming and hollering as he was being dragged into the woods in his sleeping bag. And the other 2 jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, and took off to the wood line where they could hear their friend back up in the wood line somewhere. And when they get in there, he's scrambling out of his sleeping bag. There's nothing around, but he's coming out of his sleeping bag, and they got their flashlights, and he said something drug him in there. So did it know that he was in the sleeping bag when it drug him? Did he get scrunched up into the foot of the sleeping bag as it pulled him, and then it realized it had somebody in there? Did it just think it was snatching a blanket, and then when the person was in the sleeping bag making noises, it let go and ran? Or did it run because the other two boys were coming with flashlights? I don't know, but it's an interesting story that they have all of these stories, and this is just out. This is in the suburb of Kansas City. You know, the lady said even a year later there was a young man that showed up at her door and was like, hey, you know, I'm so and so, and I live, you know, one county over, and are you the lady, you know, that has the Bigfoot stuff going on here? And because by then all of her kids had told their friends, and they had told somebody, and so that was kind of where some Bigfoot stuff, everybody knew that was Bigfoot stuff going on their property there. And she this young man stopped by, and he was like, you know, are you the family that had Bigfoot stuff going on here? And she's like, by that time she was starting to get tired of telling the story and getting ridiculed, so she was like, yes, you know, what can I do for you? And he was like, well, he said, I was hunting, and he said, I saw one from my tree stand, you know, maybe it was one county over or in the same county but not too far from there. But so that was interesting that somebody else came to her to talk about it when he himself saw one. So and I guess things just kind of died down, and then they never saw him anymore, no sign of him or anything. And here's the interesting part. When I was there probably 10-12 years ago, and I went home with all of this information, I had taken notes, and I was like, man, that is awesome. It's only, you know, it's only 40 minutes for me, 35 minutes for me, and where I live. And so it's people that I can believe. You know, I went to church with them. So I'm back home, and I'm watching the news that night, and I swear to you, on the news there was this thing called, from Liberty, Missouri, they were having some issues at a goat farm that they were calling the Goat Mangler. And you might even be able to look this up online and see a video from the newscaster talking about the Goat Mangler. Something was going in and killing goats on this goat farm, and leaving most of the bodies, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, and I got on the map and looked where this goat farm was, and there's a creek that runs all the way back to the property where I was just interviewing this whole family on this property. So maybe 5 miles of this creek, and it goes by this goat farm. And I'm thinking to myself, what if an older Bigfoot can no longer catch deer and is getting infirmed as it ages? Would it predate on something more easy, like a, you know, huge goat farm? Wouldn't it be easy to snatch a couple of goats every couple of nights or whatever? And that's what I was thinking. I was like, wow, how interesting would that be? Because I've never heard a report of anybody talking about, man, something's killing the goats like crazy. But on the news report, they talked about having game officials come out and put out game cams, and they're saying it's probably a mountain lion or bobcat. But yet, I've never seen anything make the news before about something predating on somebody's goats. You know, a lot of times you would just find tracks that says it's a mountain lion, and who would call the news to make a big news article about it? So I thought, in the fact that it was within the location of that area, I thought it was at least plausible that maybe an older Bigfoot that's still in the area is now no longer able to catch wild deer, or, you know, really catch wild animals like it used to, but still trying to survive. And to me that just made sense. But, you know, I never did get any answers. I couldn't find any answers to what they ever uncovered from that, where they put out the game cams or anything like that. But man, so interesting, so interesting. Well, anyways, that's just another good story, and I wouldn't have got it if it wouldn't have been from my church people who directed me in to talk to these people and have it happen so close to me. Of course I believe them. I don't see where they would have any gain to lie about all of those things. And I've got an interview coming up Friday where I'm going to talk to a guy. This interview, I'm going to be able to get him to tell the story. I don't like telling somebody else's story, but the woman, the matriarch of the family has since passed. Of course, the patriarch of the family had passed before I even talked to him, and the only one left are the children, who are now adults, and they live all over the United States. So I just wanted to tell the story because it is so interesting, and it's close here around Kansas City. And there is stuff going around Kansas City if that interests you at all, especially if you're local to this area. But I've got another story coming up Friday when I interview this guy about an area a little south of Kansas City while they were catfishing. So stay tuned. Bye.